8 years ago, the Lord sent me back to my alma mater, Christ for the Nations. I went to the same school Rick did, only he was there 10 years ago. I was there 75 years ago, I think. But a lot of great worship leaders, worshipers have come out. CFNI, Rick is one, Carrie, Joe, most of you probably know, and Klaus Kuhn, and many others. But I was there in the 70s, and God impacted my life. In fact, I ended up at Christ for the Nations because they were the first organization, ministry, to start recording live worship. And they just hung microphones in the room and would worship for an hour and record it and sell those cassette tapes. Some of you don't know what a cassette tape is. Those of you that know, tell the younger folks what a cassette tape is on the way home tonight. But you know, I didn't know anything about Christ for the Nations, and I was a young man on fire for God that's recently come back to the Lord after a couple of years of running. And boy, I was on fire. I didn't know what I was going to do with my life, but I just knew that I was hungry for more of God. And a friend of mine walked up to me and gave me a cassette tape and said, "You got to hear this." I had no idea what it was. Other than they said it's worship, I didn't know what to expect. My idea of a cassette tape of music was 12 songs with, you know, from the studio. And I turned this CD on, this cassette on, and the presence of God filled my car, and I began to weep, and I just said, "What is this?" I'd never heard anything like it before. And I found myself saying, "I've got to find this place. I have to go see this." And so I ended up going to Christ for the Nations for a visit, and I left 4 years later. So. And I've gone back over the years. It is a great place. It's a great school. Rick mentioned guys like Wayne Myers, that probably one of the greatest patriarchs of the faith alive in the world. Comes in every year. He touched my life deeply as well. But I was there about 8 years ago, and the Lord moved on me. I gave a prophecy. I don't do this very often, but I prophesied for about 40 minutes. It's one of those rare occasions where I closed my eyes. It would seem like I was watching a TV screen, and it just wouldn't stop. And I was just sort of narrating what I was seeing. And I was prophesying what God was going to do in the school in the years to come, and in Dallas, and even in the nation. But probably say half or 2/3 of it was about the school there, what God was going to do to help bring forth a third great awakening and disciple the nations. Little did I know that I was prophesying my own destiny. That's a weird thing, isn't it? I had no idea that God would one day send me back there to lead Christ for the Nations Institute and help birth what I had prophesied. But here I am. The Lord sent me back a year ago, and I've felt like I've been sent back because of what God's about to do. How many of you believe a third great awakening is coming? And God's about to send, I believe, the greatest outpouring of His Spirit the world has ever seen. That's quite a statement, isn't it? That's what I believe. I don't believe we've ever seen anything like what God is getting ready to do. So there are going to be lots of young folks, old folks, middle-aged folks that are going to be wanting to be used by the Lord, get to know the Lord. And so we have a booth out there to tell you a little about Christ for the Nations, what we have to offer. A 1-year program, 2 years, 3 years. Have a Spanish school. Have kids there from 60 nations. Christ for the Nations has planted over 50 Bible schools around the world. There's a lot happening. It's a great place to be taught by some of the greatest teachers. Lou comes in every year. Cindy, we have a different guest lecturer every week. And so I just feel like there's probably somebody here tonight that's wondering what's the next step for my life. And you might want to stop out there and grab one of these brochures, maybe one of these drop cards, and ask a few questions. And there's some folks there that can tell you about Christ for the Nations, and maybe the Lord wants you there. I believe some of you that will happen. I was raised in church. My dad was an evangelist for the first 13 years of my life. I was at church almost every night, because back then they had one-week revivals, sometimes 2-week revivals. They would go every night, and then the evangelist would go to another church and do another revival. Revival wasn't so much an outpouring of the Holy Spirit, it was a series of meetings. And when we were close enough to do it peacefully, he used to take my mom and my brother and I. My sister wasn't born yet. And I've probably heard thousands of messages by the time I was 10 years old, because I just heard preaching almost every night. I think I got saved before I was born. And I really did walk with the Lord until I was 17 years old. My dad was a great preacher, and when I was probably, I think, let's say 5th grade, maybe 6th grade, so that was maybe about 12, 13. God started using him in signs and wonders, and I began to see a new dimension of the kingdom manifest. I read about miracles, and I'd heard about miracles, but I'd never seen a miracle. My dad was a Nazarene evangelist, and then he received the baptism of the Holy Spirit, and when they heard that he spoke in tongues, he was asked to leave that denomination. And he went and started pastoring. He started pastoring a full gospel Pentecostal church. And really, I don't think he knew what God was going to do with his life, but one night the Lord just started moving on him in a very unique way, and he started calling out words of knowledge over people. The word of knowledge is information given by the Holy Spirit about a situation that you would have no way of knowing naturally. And he'd never had this happen to him before, and I'd never seen him do this before, and I'd never seen anybody do it before. And he'd just say, he would just look like he was staring a hole through somebody, and then he would just say, "You right here, stand up." And they would stand, and he'd start talking about their life and something that happened to them when they were 13, or a car wreck they had been in 7 years ago, and how God's going to heal your back, and you have this wrong with it. Then he started getting really weird with it. He'd get their name and their doctor's name, and he'd say, "Your husband's name is," and I knew this wasn't fake because I knew him, and I knew how it was happening. And it blew me away. I think it blew him away. I remember asking him, "How did you do this? How did this happen?" And he said, "I don't know." It's like, I look at my son-in-law Blake, and I know things about him. It's in my brain. I know where he's from. I know he's very lucky to be married to my daughter. I know that he needs to be careful and treat her right. I'll take him out. I just know things. He said, it's like, I looked at people and it's like, I don't know how I got in there, but I knew things. It's like I was looking at somebody. Information was there. He said, so we were introduced to the gifts of the Spirit. And this started happening in his life on a very regular basis. He started expecting it and sort of, what you might call stirring up the gifts of the Spirit. And so, there was never really a Sunday night service or a Wednesday night service that went by, but he wouldn't do that. And then he started going out to conferences and places that God would use him that way. And I saw the Lord perform hundreds, I won't say thousands, but I don't want to exaggerate it. I know that there were hundreds, in the upper hundreds, if not thousands of miracles I saw. I don't mean just like people had a headache and they said, my head feels better. To me, that's a healing, not a miracle. It's good. It's not belittling it. I'm just saying a miracle is something that transcends what's possible, you know, normally it's. And I watched his ministry in this way for probably 5 years. I saw eyes open, blind eyes, never seen before. Nothing could ever do what it does to you to see something of that nature, a person that's never seen before, begin to see. I saw people walk for the first time. I saw one little kid that was probably 6, maybe younger, I don't know. He had braces on his legs, and his legs were deformed, and he could walk a little with his braces on, but you've probably seen people, you know, he just had to kind of drag his feet, but at least he could walk with his braces. And I saw Dad pray for him and say, "Take your braces off." And I thought, whoa, boy, what's going to happen now? Am I going to see what obviously my dad thinks we're going to see? And I watched this kid walk for the first time. And so, you know, it was Dad said to help him up and picked him up out of his seat. And the kid, just without the braces, kind of wobbled a little bit. He said, "Come on, boy, you can do it." Started walking with him. And he starts walking better and better. And then you could hear the bones popping and cracking. And you could see him getting strength in his legs. And all of a sudden, I watched this kid that had never walked without braces running around the room. Now that'll get your attention. And when you see something like that, it's life-changing. I saw lots of people healed of cancer. You know, some people you don't know if they're healed. Just they feel better, but they have to go to the doctor and be checked out to know if they're really healed. Maybe the pain went away, but you know, you wanted to get confirmed. But you know, there were times where God did such supernatural things that you knew they were healed. Like one lady came with stomach cancer, and he prayed for her. And I used to, sometimes I would come up and help him. You know, he would record everything, and he didn't have cordless mics, and we didn't have the equipment technology now. So, you know, when he was really getting to where he would pray for him, he'd have somebody behind the person being prayed for, and he'd give them the mic, and we'd kind of hold the mic, and so he could talk and touch him or whatever, and if they fell down, we would catch them, you know. So I was right next to this lady, and he was interviewing her. "What is it, you know, and what's wrong with you?" "I have cancer in my stomach, and doctors give me no hope." And he prays for her, and then she starts, this is kind of gross, but this is what she did. She starts gagging. And I'm thinking, I'm behind her, I'm thinking, what's this lady doing? Is she going to throw up? And all of a sudden, she vomited up this cancer. This ugly, bloody mass. Right on the floor. It's like, do you gross out or do you get excited? So we just all decided to get excited. Dad says, "Somebody go to the bathroom and get some towels and bucket and clean this up." But the place is going crazy because she could tell she was sick. We don't know what a cancer looks like in there, but everybody knew what happened. Pain was gone. She was feeling great. Of course, tests showed later that she was completely healed. But when you see God do supernatural things like that, it just does something to you. I saw him hit a lady once. Don't ever do this, okay? Don't ever do this. Please don't do this. I saw him hit a lady in the stomach, had a tumor. She looked like she was probably 7 months pregnant. We all thought she was pregnant when she came up, but she said, no, I'm not pregnant. I have a tumor the size of probably a volleyball or, you know. My dad just wrapped that microphone cord around his wrist and just talking to her without there being any sound, PA sound, and just wrapped around his wrist, and nobody knew what he was doing, and all of a sudden he just went, oh! He just went into the microphone, you know. And she went, oh! And everybody in the room went, oh! And then her stomach went, and we're all just, I mean, at first I'm thinking, you know, somebody needs to hurt him, you know, somebody needs to, how could you hit this one? And then we're all just ecstatic. It's one of the words in the book of Acts, by the way, for the attitude and reaction in people when they see miracles. The Greek word wonder and amazement, one of the Greek words is ecstasia. We get the word ecstatic from it. We were ecstatic. She was ecstatic, running around the room, doing this to her clothes. Never forget it. Never forget it. You see, the gift of faith would come on him. My dad he wasn't that kind of person normally. I've never seen him do anything outlandish in a public place just to get attention or draw attention to himself. He was just, it was when the gift of faith would come on him, he would just become a different man. I saw him once. The man whose back was crooked, and the man walked like this, and his back was rounded, and that's just the way he was. He was probably 50, 60, which is getting younger all the time, by the way. And Dad prayed for him and said, all right, stand up straight. And the guy said, and Dad says, go on, you can do it. And the guy's going. And my dad says, I said stand up. Goes around behind him, grabs him by the shoulders, puts his knee in the guy's back. And I'm thinking to myself, he's completely lost at this time. And he takes this guy, and you can hear his back popping. And this guy's groaning. He's not like hallelujah. He's and that, and he goes, thinking, you're gonna kill this man. And finally, all the way up, and this man starts going, I'm healed, I'm healed. He starts jumping up and down and running around the front. And I'm going, and I won't tell these stories very much because I can just see some of the weirdos in the kingdom that don't really hear from God doing something crazy. He had probably walked with the Lord for 40-some years by the time he trusted himself to hear from God in that way. There was one occasion in Haiti, there were 19 deaf people in front of him to be prayed for. As they'd advertised the meeting, there'd be signs and wonders, and of course they'd pray for the sick, but then they'd get him saved. So the 19 people came that wanted to be healed. He said, who's in here that's deaf? I want to pray for you. Of course, somebody's having to sign to them, and 19 people. came forward, completely deaf. Every single one of them. Every single one of them. Instantly healed. Amazing thing I've seen, I think I've seen it all. When I was 17, Dad went through a situation, probably when I was 16, some people rose up against him in the church he pastored. Really did some really unkind things, and even though he started the church, they basically orchestrated a coup of sorts with the board, and he got kicked out. Some lies were spread, and it was just an ugly situation, and strange things can happen in churches, Christians, And I remember we were just out in the street. We didn't have anything. We didn't know what we were going to do to survive. It was really a devastating summer. And he didn't deal well with that. He had some, I guess, issues he'd never dealt with. And I don't know. I'm not trying to figure it all out, but he really opened himself up to real bitterness. I mean, he just couldn't get past it. He just was filled with hatred, bitterness, and anger. And it's not like this happened for a few days and then he got over it. I mean, he became a bitter man. And that, of course, opened the door for him in other areas of his life for the enemy to come in and attack him. And the next thing that happened was that he was involved sexually with his secretary. Of course, I didn't know this at the time, but he's had an affair with his secretary, and ultimately he decided to divorce my mother and marry this lady, and leave the ministry. And when I was 17 years old, everything I believed in was shattered. A man that I had seen work miracles like Elijah had walked away. I mean, we didn't have anything. My mother worked as support to him and a housewife all her life. She had no training. She said, I don't know what I'm going to do. And, I remember holding my mother as she just fell one night, just collapsed in my lap on the couch, just sobbed and said, I'm going to take my life. I just don't want to live. And I remember trying to just comfort her and say, it's going to be okay, Mom. We'll get through this. And, my concept, my connection to God, my person that showed me what God was like, my hero, the person I most wanted to be like, had walked away. And I remember my faith was so shattered, I just thought, I don't know what to believe anymore. I know there's a God. I know there's a God. But I don't know if I like him anymore. don't know if I believe it, his heart. Why did you let this happen to us? You know, as though the Lord was in any way responsible. But I just didn't have any real ability to process pain. Nobody really to help me. And I suppose I could have found help. I just didn't. I didn't know where to go. I didn't know what to do. And so I became bitter, and I became angry, and I was a very, very, very bitter young man. Wrath, anger, and I started running for the Lord. So I don't want any more to do with church people. I'm not going to curse God, but I don't want anything to do with anything He's doing. I don't want it in my life. And so for 2 years, I started running and turned to a very rebellious lifestyle of drugs and alcohol, and partying, and just trying to run away from the pain. And never had even experimented in things like that before. Had never been drunk, had never done any drugs, had never done anything but serve the Lord. And went from church kid to crazy overnight. And after 2 years of running, the Lord, by the way, He would talk to me frequently. I didn't know at the time it was the Lord. I guess I just would find myself thinking thoughts about God. Something in my heart would this is really strange. I find myself deep in my heart loving Him. I didn't know what to do with it. And the confusion and the anger and the turmoil internally was so strong. I didn't do anything with it, but I would find myself late at night, laying in bed, I would say, I don't understand anything anymore. I would close my eyes sometimes and just say, but I know I still love you. After 2 years of this, I don't know why I'm doing this now, I just feel led to do it. After 2 years of this, I was in a bar one night. I was with my friends, and I was very, very high. And we used to get stoned and go to this bar that had a live band. And, you know, it wasn't like this cool nightclub. This was a very, very evil, evil place. It was just the kind of place you're not going to take mom to, okay? This was a bad place. And I was there, I was stoned, and I was standing in front of speakers about this tall, just about 3 feet away, losing my hearing, stoned out of my mind. And the Lord spoke to me. And I don't know if it was audible, it didn't seem like anybody else heard it, but it was that loud to me. And He said, "What are you doing here?" And my first response was, "What are you doing here?" What are you doing here? I'm not going to let you go. I've never left you. And then he said, you know this is not who you are, don't you? And I just didn't know what to do with all this, so I left and walked out. I was completely sober. I walked outside for an hour or so and just processed with the Lord. I said, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. I don't even know if I can find my way back. And honestly, it took 2 more months. And in the 2-year time when I was running from God, people talked to me about hell. They tried to scare me back into the church. People talked to me about destiny, my future, you know. People tried to draw on my roots. None of it really seemed to matter much. None of that was enough to motivate me back. But when I realized that God loved me so much, that he was willing to come into that pig pen that I was in that night, I just didn't know what to do with that. I was deeply embarrassed. I was overcome with his love. And about 2 months later, I had many conversations with the Lord. And I really didn't know. I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't know what would change, other than I knew that I was ready to return to the Father's house. And I went to a church on a Sunday night. Back then, I thought you had to do it in church. I went and sat on the back row. Nobody knew I was doing anything as far as conversing with the Lord. They probably just thought I was some sinner that roamed in and sat in the back. It wasn't a church I'd ever been to. And I surrendered myself to the Lord. I said, Lord, I don't know how all this is going to work out. And I'm still very confused. But I'm coming back to you. I'm giving my heart to you, and I'm never going to turn away. I'm going to follow you all the days of my life. And from that day to this, that was in September of 1973, from that day to this, I've been chasing hard after God. And believe it or not, I'm really going somewhere with all these stories tonight, okay? One of the places I'm headed to in a few minutes is, I've been hearing the Lord very clearly say, we're coming into a season where many, many prodigals